She told me not to flirt, but every glance made it impossible to obey. The first time I really noticed her, it wasn't in a dramatic way. She was just there, standing by the window of the classroom, the soft afternoon light catching the gold in her hair, making it seem almost alive. I was used to seeing teachers as distant figures, voices floating over the clatter of desks, but something about her felt different. There was an effortless grace in the way she moved, the quiet authority in the curve of her shoulders, the subtle warmth in her expression when she smiled at a student's joke. I tried not to stare, but my eyes kept drifting back. The faint scent of her perfume, a mix of vanilla and something softer, indefinable, lingered in the air long after she passed. When she walked past my desk, her hand brushed mine lightly as she handed back my graded paper. It was such a small touch, almost accidental, but I felt it, a warmth that spread up my arm and left a quiet, lingering awareness in my chest. My heartbeat seemed to catch for a moment, and I realized I had been holding my breath. There was something in the way she spoke too, gentle, precise, yet with a softness that made it impossible to ignore. Even when she corrected a mistake, her voice didn't feel harsh, it felt like she was trying to guide, not judge. I noticed the tiny habits, how she tucked a stray hair behind her ear, how she adjusted her scarf when she stood by the board, the slight tilt of her head when she listened. All of it seemed so natural, so human, but to me, it was magnetic. I reminded myself over and over that she was a teacher, that I was just a student. Boundaries existed for a reason. But noticing her, the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed, the gentle firmness in her gestures, made it impossible not to be drawn in. And yet, there was an unspoken tension, a quiet electricity I didn't understand. It wasn't just attraction, it was curiosity, fascination, a sense that maybe, just maybe, she could see me too, if only for a fleeting moment. By the time class ended, I was already replaying every small gesture, every subtle glance. The spark had been lit, quietly, almost imperceptibly, but I felt it clearly in the depths of my chest. And though I knew I shouldn't, a part of me secretly hoped she'd notice me too. The tension between us was impossible to ignore. After that first quiet spark, the classroom felt different, charged, as if the air itself had grown warmer whenever she was near. I caught myself searching for excuses to interact with her, small moments where I could test the boundaries without crossing them. And one day, in a moment that should have been ordinary, I did. It started as a joke, a passing comment about a tricky assignment, meant to make her laugh. Her laugh, soft but sharp, made something tighten in my chest. She looked at me then, her eyes narrowed slightly, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Don't flirt with me," she said, voice calm but firm, carrying the authority I couldn't help respecting. And yet, there was a softness beneath it, like a hidden invitation to see what would happen next. I couldn't resist replying with a grin, teasing, "Then maybe you should stop looking so tempting." I said it lightly, a joke, but the way she froze for just a fraction of a second made my pulse race. Her eyes flicked up to meet mine, and there was a flash of something, amusement, maybe surprise, or something harder to name. I saw her lips press together, the tiniest hint of a smile forming, and for a heartbeat, the distance between us felt fragile, easily crossed. The classroom felt suddenly smaller. I noticed the warmth of her presence as she leaned slightly toward the desk, as if unconsciously drawn closer to me. Her hand brushed against mine as she shuffled papers, and though it lasted only an instant, it sent a jolt through me, like an electric current sparking from her touch. My fingers tingled where hers had passed, and I had to bite my lip to keep from smiling too broadly. There was an unspoken game unfolding, one neither of us had named. Every glance, every accidental touch carried weight now. I wanted to linger near her, to see how far I could push the teasing without stepping over some invisible line. And she, though she issued warnings, though she reminded me of propriety, moved in a way that made the tension undeniable. A flicker of amusement in her eyes, a subtle lean closer during a discussion, a pause that felt too long to be just politeness. It was intoxicating. The attraction wasn't just in the words we exchanged, but in the space between them, in the brush of skin, the tilt of her head, the way she made ordinary interactions feel electric. I felt that delicate balance, the thrill of flirting with danger, tempered by her quiet authority, and by my own awareness of what shouldn't be. And yet, the closer we got, the harder it became to care. By the end of the day, I was caught in a tangle of excitement and hesitation, craving more of that subtle tension, that quiet game of daring and restraint. I knew the spark was no longer just mine, it had become ours, however unspoken, however fragile. It was outside the classroom that I first saw her in a way that made her feel less untouchable and more human. The spark between us had been building, subtle, teasing, electric, but this moment softened it, turning curiosity into something deeper. She was sitting on a bench by the courtyard, a pile of papers in her lap, her expression tighter than usual. I could tell something was weighing on her, though she tried to hide it behind her usual calm composure. I hesitated before approaching, unsure if I should intrude. But there was something in her posture, a slump of her shoulders, a slight frown, the way her fingers fidgeted with the edges of a page, that made me step closer. "Are you okay?" I asked quietly, careful not to startle her. She glanced up, surprised to see me, and for a moment her professional mask faltered. Her eyes softened, revealing the fatigue and quiet vulnerability she usually kept tucked away. She shook her head, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, and I saw her hand tremble slightly as she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. Without thinking, I reached out, gently brushing a corner of the papers back into place. My fingers grazed hers for the briefest instant, and I felt that familiar spark, now tinged with tenderness rather than playful tension. She didn't pull away, only shifted slightly closer, her body language subtly inviting comfort. "I didn't realize how much work this would be today," she admitted softly, voice quiet, almost confiding. There was a pause, a weight in the air that made my chest tighten. I wanted to say something clever, something reassuring, but words felt clumsy next to the honesty in her gaze. So I simply nodded, offering her presence instead of solutions, letting her feel that she wasn't alone. We sat there in silence, the world around us moving with gentle indifference, while a quiet understanding formed between us. I noticed the faint warmth of her hand resting near mine, the small sigh as she leaned slightly toward me, trusting me in a way that felt intimate and fragile. I felt the steady rhythm of her breathing, the subtle tension in her shoulders easing as she allowed herself to relax just a little. It was in that unguarded moment that I realized the attraction between us wasn't only physical or teasing, it was emotional. She had allowed me a glimpse of her inner world, and the connection deepened in a way that no flirtatious remark ever could. The spark had grown into something tender, charged with quiet care, trust, and the thrilling tension of being close without words. By the time we stood to leave, I felt it clearly, the game of playful defiance had evolved. There was something more between us now, a slow, steady pull toward each other, grounded not just in desire but in understanding and empathy. And it scared me as much as it excited me. After seeing her vulnerability, everything about her seemed magnified. I started noticing details I had never paid attention to before, the small, almost imperceptible gestures that revealed more than words ever could. It wasn't just her presence anymore, it was the way she inhabited a space, the subtleties that made her impossible to ignore. I remember one afternoon in the library. She was leaning over a desk, explaining a concept to another student, her voice soft but deliberate. The sunlight caught the edges of her hair, turning them to strands of gold, and I realized I had been staring again. She didn't notice, or maybe she did, and chose not to, but the brush of her sleeve against my arm as I passed by sent that familiar thrill up my spine. My pulse quickened for a reason I couldn't justify. It wasn't just the physical, though the touch lingered in my skin long after she was gone. It was the small, human moments that made her magnetic. The way she'd bite her lip when thinking, the slight tilt of her head as she listened, the faint exhale as if carrying a quiet thought she didn't say aloud. Each detail felt like a private invitation to notice her, to see her in ways no one else did. Sometimes she glanced in my direction when she thought I wasn't paying attention. A flicker of recognition in her eyes, the hint of a smile at the corner of her lips, made me acutely aware of our silent, shared space. It was as though a conversation existed between us without words, a dialogue in glances and gestures. I felt both exhilarated and painfully aware of the boundaries that kept me from saying anything out loud. One day, while she organized papers on a table, she dropped a pen. I handed it to her, our fingers brushing for a fraction of a second. That fleeting touch lingered in my memory, the warmth and subtle pressure imprinting itself on my mind. I noticed the softness of her skin, the slight hesitation before she pulled her hand back, as if testing the limits of propriety. It was a quiet spark, but enough to leave me distracted for the rest of the day. These quiet observations became my obsession. Every gesture, every subtle expression became a small story I read with fascination. And though we were careful to maintain the surface of teacher and student, a growing intimacy hummed beneath the ordinary interactions. I realized that longing didn't always need words, it could live in shared glances, accidental touches, and the unspoken knowledge that we both noticed, both felt, both wanted more. By the end of that week, I knew that our connection had evolved into something more profound. The spark had deepened into a slow-burning flame, alive in the details that no one else would see. And the more I watched, the more I ached to be closer, even if just for a heartbeat. By now, the quiet tension between us had become impossible to ignore, both for me and, I sensed, for her. Every glance, every accidental touch, every fleeting smile carried weight. And yet, with that growing intimacy came hesitation, an undercurrent of uncertainty that made my chest tighten every time I thought of her. I knew I was walking a line, one that society, propriety, and my own conscience insisted I shouldn't cross, but my heart had other plans. It was during a rainy afternoon that the conflict hit hardest. We were in the library, each pretending to focus on our own work, yet aware of the small, shared space between us. She reached for a book, and our hands brushed. Normally, it was a fleeting spark, but that day, it lingered, just a fraction longer than usual. I could feel the warmth of her skin, the subtle shift of her posture, and the almost imperceptible intake of her breath. My heart raced, but so did a part of my mind, whispering, "Don't read too much into it. This is just a teacher and a student. Don't cross the line." Her glance met mine, and I saw it, the same hesitation mirrored in her eyes. A tension built between us, unspoken yet impossible to ignore. The smallest gestures felt monumental, the way her hand rested near mine for a split second too long, the tilt of her head when she listened, the faint sigh she let out when turning a page. Each detail seemed laden with meaning, and each left me more confused about what I wanted versus what I should want. I found myself overthinking every interaction. Was her smile genuine or just polite? Was her touch an accident or deliberate? And the more I questioned, the more I realized I couldn't distinguish between desire and admiration, between temptation and respect. My emotions were tangled, a mixture of longing, fear, and the bittersweet thrill of forbidden attraction. She, too, seemed caught in the same emotional limbo. Once, when a classmate interrupted us, I noticed her subtle retreat, a blink and you miss it hesitation, as though she had been about to say, or do, something and stopped herself. The sight tugged at my chest. I wanted to tell her it was okay, that I could understand the complicated nature of what we were feeling, yet the words stayed lodged in my throat. By the end of the day, I was left with a restless ache. Desire, respect, fear, and fascination all collided within me, leaving me both exhilarated and tormented. I knew one thing clearly, the connection between us was growing stronger, and no amount of hesitation could erase the magnetic pull drawing us closer. But it wasn't just about attraction anymore, it was about navigating emotions that felt dangerously deep, emotions I wasn't sure we were ready to face. The days following our quiet tension felt heavier, yet strangely more intimate. It was as if the unspoken understanding between us had settled into the spaces we shared, the pauses in conversation, the subtle glances across the room, the brush of our hands when exchanging books. We were both aware of it, though neither of us dared name it aloud. And then one afternoon, the invisible wall between us almost shattered. It happened in the library again, that quiet sanctuary where the outside world seemed to slow. She was arranging papers at a table, her movements meticulous but relaxed. I was nearby, pretending to focus on my own notes, yet every sense was attuned to her, the faint scent of her perfume, the soft rhythm of her breathing, the way her fingers lingered on a page before letting go. My chest tightened as I watched, caught between desire and restraint. "Thanks for helping earlier," she said suddenly, her voice low, almost shy. It wasn't a confession in words, but in tone it carried a weight that made my heart skip. I looked up, and for a brief moment, the library fell away. Our eyes met, and I saw a flicker of vulnerability there, softened by warmth and perhaps amusement. I wanted to respond with something profound, something that could carry the depth of my feelings, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I offered her a smile, tentative but genuine. She returned it, her lips curving just enough to tell me she understood, even without a single word. The gesture was enough. It spoke of unspoken acknowledgement, a silent confession that our feelings were no longer hidden in shadows, they were present, palpable, and quietly mutual. Our hands brushed again as I passed her a pen, and this time, neither of us moved away immediately. There was a weight in that touch, a careful, deliberate acknowledgement of the connection we'd both been feeling for weeks. The warmth lingered, grounding us in the moment, as though saying, "Yes, I feel it too. And yes, I'm willing to let it exist here, carefully, without rushing it." I noticed her eyes soften as she looked at me, a subtle vulnerability that contrasted with her usual composed confidence. The corners of her lips twitched in that almost smile, the kind that leaves you wondering what she's thinking but assures you that the feeling is shared. It was a fragile moment, delicate yet full of significance. By the time we left the library, the world felt subtly altered. Something had shifted, not dramatically, not with declarations or grand gestures, but quietly, deeply. The spark that had begun in curiosity and teasing had grown into something tender, charged with understanding and the thrill of silent acknowledgement. And though neither of us spoke of it directly, I felt certain that this was the moment when our hearts had begun to admit what our words could not. After weeks of teasing, tension, and quiet observation, the connection between us had grown undeniable. It no longer needed words to exist, it lived in the spaces between our glances, the brush of our hands, and the subtle rhythms of our shared presence. There was still hesitation, of course, a respect for boundaries, for age, for propriety, but the longing had matured into something deeper, something patient, gentle, and full of meaning. It was during a quiet afternoon, the kind where the sun filters through the windows in soft, golden streaks, that the culmination of our journey unfolded. We were sitting across from each other at the library table, surrounded by the comforting hum of pages turning and whispered conversations. She looked up from her notes, catching my gaze, and held it with a softness that made my chest tighten. There was no teasing, no playful defiance, just recognition, understanding, and quiet warmth. For a moment, we simply existed in that shared awareness, the world narrowing until it was only the two of us. Her fingers rested near mine on the table, and I found myself inching closer, careful yet deliberate. When our hands finally met, it was slow and unhurried, her skin warm against mine. The contact was brief, yet enough to convey the depth of connection we'd cultivated over weeks of silent confessions, glances, and subtle touches. Her lips curved into a small, genuine smile, one that carried both reassurance and invitation. I mirrored it, feeling the tension dissolve, replaced by the quiet certainty that this closeness, this mutual understanding, was exactly where we were meant to be. Words were unnecessary, our hearts spoke through the gentle press of her hand against mine, the way she leaned just slightly closer, and the steady warmth of her presence beside me. There was laughter too, soft and light, mingled with the comfort of familiarity. We shared stories, small details of our lives, and the occasional teasing remark, but now it felt safe, free from hesitation, free from unspoken tension, yet still intimate. The boundaries remained acknowledged, but they no longer felt like barriers, they were part of the delicate rhythm we had built together. By the end of the afternoon, as we parted with a lingering touch and a shared look that promised more, I realized how much we had grown, not just individually, but together. The slow burn attraction that had started with curiosity and playful defiance had blossomed into a warm, enduring intimacy. It was a romance built on trust, understanding, and the quiet thrill of closeness, a connection that respected life, age, and experience while embracing the depth of our emotions. And as I walked away, I felt a contentment I hadn't known before, a calm certainty that our story, carefully nurtured and patiently awaited, had reached its perfect, heartfelt resolution. By the end of the afternoon, as we parted with a lingering touch and a shared look that promised more, I realized how much we had grown, not just individually, but together. The slow burn attraction that had started with curiosity and playful defiance had blossomed into a warm, enduring intimacy. It was a romance built on trust, understanding, and the quiet thrill of closeness, a connection that respected life, age, and experience while embracing the depth of our emotions. And as I walked away, I felt a contentment I hadn't known before, a calm certainty that our story, carefully nurtured and patiently awaited, had reached its perfect, heartfelt resolution. If you want to experience every moment of this slow burn romance, the teasing glances, the lingering touches, and the quiet confessions, watch the full story in the link in the description.